Every time I see a Tudor watch, I'm like, ooh, you know what? That could be my Tudor watch to add to my rotation, to add to my watch box. And then I see the next Tudor and I go, oh, you know what? I like this even more. This, I think, is the one that I should buy. And then I see another one and I'm even more excited about that one. I've been climbing the Tudor ladder recently, most recently with the Pelagos, and that is a heck of a tool watch, a great diver, very contemporary, very robust, a lot to love. And I thought that was the one that I would eventually add to my collection. And then, guys, man, this is the story of a watch idiot savant. I saw this black base steel and gold chronograph in person, and it's so much different in person than it is looking at it just under the glass at an authorized dealer. I've done that before. I'm like, okay, yeah, there's the new watch from Tudor. I don't think I'll try it on. I've seen pictures. I've seen a couple reviews on YouTube, but it's not until that I really put it on wrist and I saw it in the metal, in the flesh. I've got two of them here in front of the camera. It wasn't until that point that I became captivated, that I went, you know what? This release, this is stealthy good. You know, everyone, when they're talking about underrated Tudors, they're talking about the North Flag. I'm guilty of that. Some of them are talking about the P01. I'm not in that camp, but I can see the arguments for that. No, I think this is the underrated Tudor. If there is such a watch on the market, I think this is the one that people are sleeping on, that they really should check out in person if they have the opportunity, because it is good. It's really good. So I don't want this to sound like an advertisement. I'm just excited. I've been very choosy on what I spend time creating content on, especially this year as opposed to previous years. And I'm trying to go with less quantity and more quality, if that makes sense. And so I'm only giving screen time to watches I'm really interested in. So I know I'm going to be favorable in a lot of my reviews, but we're not going to shy away from talking about the negative elements, the areas for improvement, because this watch certainly has those elements, and there will be subjective things to the design, to the layout, that you just might not like. And I recognize that, and that's okay. But let's get to the details here. Let's start with the dimensions. We have 41.6 millimeters of diameter, 50.2 in overall lug-to-lug length, 14.6 in overall height, with a 22 millimeter lug width tapering down to 18 millimeters at the clasp. We have a 2 millimeter box sapphire crystal, which I think is noteworthy because of the way this case is constructed. We have a pretty dominant slab side, excuse me, that's a tongue twister. We have a dominant slab side case, all polish. And then we step up to a solid gold bezel. And then we have one final step up to this box sapphire crystal, kind of invoking those vintage vibes, because this watch, it's kind of a hodgepodge. If we look at this, we have historic Rolex design DNA from the 6240 from the mid 1960s that carried that black acrylic bezel insert that said units per hour, that had the dominant screw pushers. I can see some of those elements. You know, if we're looking at the finish of this case, we're looking at the faux rivets of the bracelet, you guys can definitely see that. But then we have modern Black Bay here. We have a modified Breitling B01 chronograph. It really is kind of a hodgepodge of various elements, but I'm telling you, this thing works. And it's exciting in person. It has a very warm feel with the vintage elements, with the precious metal, with the lovely depth and detail of the dial. Let me show you some macro video here. We have a highly texturized dial here that's matte black. It's a great backdrop for these applied markers, the sunken sub-registers. They carry just the faintest hint of guilloche texturing. And I've got to say, this looks better than the steel variation that doesn't have that contrast with the bicompax registers or layout. This thing works. And I don't know, I'm sure this is not the first watch to do it, but it's uncommon to see gold and black with gilt, a little bit of red. I don't know. Most of the time when you're seeing high contrast dials, you're seeing a panda or a reverse panda. You're not seeing black and gold. But man, It looks good. I really like the detail work. I like the dimensional printing. I like the indexing. I like the use of red in the chronograph seconds hand, the red line of text. Maybe that's another nod to Rolex history. And I like the subtle detail of the date wheel at the 6 o'clock position, which I think is the appropriate placement for the date. But look, it's not stark white. It's not your basic date wheel that you would find in another Black Bay. This has that kind of eggshell creamy tone that matches the subtle, just the subtle warm color of the Superluminova. So I think that's a nice detail. And this is another point of contention, the snowflake hands, right? They're a dive watch handset that some people find ugly and clunky and blocky and chunky and just, it shouldn't be on a watch. And it's on a racing inspired chronograph with 200 meters of water resistance, no dive bezel, but we have screw down function pushers. This is really odd, but it works well. And I happen to love the snowflake hands. So I know some of you guys don't agree with me, and that's okay. Kevin, if you're watching this, and Kyle, if you're watching this, you got to get on board with the snowflake. I'm telling you, you're missing out. The snowflake hands are awesome. In fact, I think I prefer the snowflake hands over the Mercedes hands of my Submariner. I don't know. It's a good look in my opinion. But anyways, before I go on too much further, let's talk about the movement. So I mentioned this is a Breitling in-house B01 modified movement. Breitling debuted the B01 in 2009. And when it first came out, it had some issues. It definitely had some issues. But here we are, over 10 years later, it has been refined. It has, those issues have been addressed to the point where Tudor, right? Tudor that is known for Tudor and Rolex really bench testing the crap out of their products before they hit the market, to where the point where they were like, yes, I want that movement. And we will give you our 3-hand with the date in-house, and we'll take your B01. We're going to modify it, but we will use that as the base of our chronograph. I love that movement exchange there. I think that's great. So this is referred to as the MT5813, again, based off of the B01. We have a column wheel chronograph, vertical clutch, 41 joules, 28,800 beats per hour, 70 hours of power reserve, so just shy of 3 days. And yes, this is chronometer certified, but it's actually quite a bit different from the B01. And let me note those changes. The biggest one aesthetically will be the finish. You could argue that this is very industrial, very utilitarian, in fact, ugly and sparse, and not very attractive when it comes to the finish. But you know what? Tudor recognizes that. Rolex and Tudor, they recognize that, their movements are really nothing special to look at. They're just made to, just run accurate for decades, really. They're very solid movements. And so you will rarely see an open case back on a Rolex or a Tudor. It happens from time to time, but it's just not something that they're interested in doing because they don't think that visually you should be looking at their very basic utilitarian finished movement. Now, there will be a difference in the count of joules. And then Tudor is taking the hairspring, and instead of using a ferrous hairspring from Niverox like Breitling does, they're using a silicon hairspring. And I think that's a great move. Silicon is going to be impervious to magnetic flux. And so I think that's an upgrade. And then they've changed the way that you regulate this movement. Instead of basic regulating pins with an Edicron system like you would find in a basic B01, you're getting the variable inertia balance that you would find on a comparable Rolex or another Tudor watch. And basically that's fancy speak for very small screws that a watchmaker can adjust to change the inertia of the balance and thereby regulate the movement. So it is regarded as a step up over regulating pins with an Edicron system. So I think Tudor is actually taking the B01 and they've upgraded it. And here's the interesting part. It is far less expensive than what Breitling charges with their B01 movements in the Navitimer and the Chronomat and the Premier, which I love those. I love those watches. And when it comes to value, that is definitely a subjective thing. And it's almost not worth talking about in some instances because I can do a review and I'll get so many different comments. Like some guy will say, hey, that is such good value for money. I can't wait to go buy one. And then someone else will comment and say, man, that thing should cost $5,000 less. And it's just funny to hear the difference. But I will say, you can see a difference with the Black Bay versus say a Navitimer. This is less expensive and it has precious metal, and one could argue it is technically superior when it comes to the way this is regulated, the material for the hairspring. So I think that's just something that I can get behind as a watch enthusiast, because I do like getting value. I do like feeling like I'm getting away with something, I guess you could say. Now, I will also mention that this Tudor variation, this was the first time that the B01 was modified for a bicompax layout, where they ditched the hour counter. Now, Breitling has since done that, and I think that's a great move, but I want to note that Tudor was the first to do it, and they did change the minute counter. So instead of a traditional 30-minute counter, which you will find on most B01 movements, this carries a 45-minute counter, which I like. I think that added 15 minutes for timing something without having to do extra math, right? If you elapse that whenever, with whatever you're timing, I think that's a nice thing. Now let's talk about what's gold here, what's not gold, and what this means. So we have three different things. We have capped gold, we have solid gold, and we have wrapped gold. The big crown at the 3 o'clock position that has the coin edging, it has the Tudor rose, it's set a little bit off of the case. This is capped gold, so this is just a layer of gold that's put over a steel base, and so it's not solid. But you know what? We're saving a little bit of money there. We do have some solid gold elements. That is the bezel, and that's a significant amount of precious metal. The function pushers are done in solid gold. And then the end link, if we look at the end link, the center portion here where it's up against the case, that's also solid. I like to see that. Now the hands, the markers, unlike a Rolex, this will not be precious metal. But if we look at the bracelet, these brushed center links, these are wrapped gold. So it's a very thick layer of precious metal that's wrapped around a steel skeleton, so to speak, or a steel base. It's a little bit thicker than capped gold, and it's so thick that you will not scratch through it. If unfortunately, if you were to scratch this, which always hurts, right, on a luxury watch, and put a big mark in it, you'd still just mark the gold. You would not get through to the steel base. And so even with years of wearing this watch, you're not going to wear through. And the nice thing is, instead of costing $17,000 for full precious metal, this costs $7,000 on a bracelet full retail. So I like it. Again, this is a Tudor. This is not a Rolex. We're trying to meet a price, and I like that. I can get behind it. I'm getting the Daytona vibes. I'm getting the vintage vibes from Rolex and Tudor, but I'm also getting modern Tudor, and I'm also getting a great movement base from Breitling that I think Tudor has upgraded. And again, something about this watch, it all just meshes together. It is a hodgepodge, but it works. The finish is sharp. The way this sits on wrist. We've already talked about the fit, but also the tactile elements too. Let's talk about those. I'm going to be quiet here for a second, give you a sense of the action of the crown, the action of the function pushers, and the action of the clasp. Traditionally, Tudor movements, in-house movements, have exceptionally smooth action in the crown. And you're not going to get that here with this B01 base. This feels more like the B01s that I've had experience with in the Navitimer, in the Chronomat, in the Premier. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not as, if you're familiar with the smoothness of an in-house Tudor movement, this doesn't have the same feel as that. When it comes to the actuation of the chronograph, it is smooth as butter. There is no jump. I really like the feel of a column wheel with a vertical clutch. It's super satisfying. It is more enjoyable than the cam lever actuation of my lovely Speedmaster, which I love. I'm not trying to dog on it, but I will say the action is superior with this movement. And arguably the best thing when it comes to interacting with your watch will be taking it on and off, which we do quite a bit as watch enthusiasts. The clasp from Tudor is among the best out there. Now, I will say this does not come with a sliding micro adjustment system. You will need a spring bar tool to make the positional adjustments here. So it is traditional in that sense, but the ceramic ball bearings, just the feel of the action, the way that the clasp here is just seamless. There's no bump out like you would find on actually older generation Breitlings. It's really good. It's really satisfying. And then if we go to the low light shot, you guys can see potent superluminova. It's not ugly old radium loom, kind of that too burnt or too baked in the sun feel that sometimes we get with vintage superluminova or faux patina. This just carries a great warm effect in natural light, but in low light, obviously very potent. There is a decent amount of surface area. The snowflake hands are very legible, and I would say that the loom is a high point of this piece. Now let's talk about negative elements real quick. I would say the biggest thing that most of you would agree with me here is the lack of anti-reflective treatment on this box sapphire crystal. And I will put it next to my Speedmaster, which has a very similar crystal. It's also a box sapphire. You guys can see kind of a smoky ring on that one. Textured black dial. This does not have anti-reflective treatment. So again, it's very similar to the Tudor. I think the Tudor looks a little bit nicer. The reflections are less defined and they're enlarged. So perhaps it comes down to the cut of the crystal, the quality of the crystal, or maybe, I don't know, maybe Tudor's actually applying a very weak layer of anti-reflective treatment. I don't know, but it could be improved. It's definitely not at the level of a Breitling or an Omega crystal, but for whatever reason, I'm not privy to those reasons. I can only speculate. Rolex and Tudor rarely use anti-reflective treatment. They rarely do it. And so I think this could benefit from some great anti-reflective treatment, but that's just, I don't know, that's just my personal opinion. The other thing that is kind of subjective is the faux rivet style links. Some of you love it. Some of you hate it. I don't know really what to think, honestly, but this watch is great. This watch works, so it's something that I could live with, even if I come to the conclusion that I'm not a fan of the faux rivet style. Now, the last thing I think is worth mentioning is the snowflake hand. It can obscure the minute counter on the dial between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m., or I guess a.m. as well. If you're trying to time something, the snowflake hand is substantial. It has some good real estate there. And so you can get some legibility issues in that regard. Not a huge deal. I definitely would not like needle hands or something like that. That kind of eliminates that problem. There's something about this hodgepodge, this mess of a watch that I just wouldn't change. I really like that. So guys, if you can't tell, I think this watch is great. This has value to it. And I know it sounds silly talking about value in a luxury watch. We don't technically need watches. We buy watches because we love watches. We love the history. We love the mechanics. We love the way it makes us feel when we put it on. And I get all of that. And this is one of those watches that speaks to me. So I hope you've enjoyed the review. If you have any questions about this particular Tudor or another Tudor, let me know. And if there is a Tudor you would like me to review and present in the future, please put that in the comments. I will see what I can do in getting it in. Brent L Miller Jewelers in Lancaster, Pennsylvania lent these two watches in for me to present. And they're happy to send more Tudor in the future. So if there's something you guys would like to see, let me know. And if you're looking for a quote on a Tudor, I'll put my contact in the description with Brent L Miller. It's a family-owned brick and mortar in Pennsylvania here in the United States. And Brad has been a longtime viewer of the channel. So if you're shopping for a Tudor, that's my recommendation. All the contacts in the description. Thank you very much for watching today. I know we went a little bit long. And again, reach out with questions. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you next time.